Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And today I'm really excited. We got Mark Slabaugh. We didn't do the green room check, so I'm pretty sure I got it right because I didn't ask. Yes, I did. Because if I had asked, I would have screwed it up because for our loyal listeners, they know if Otis has been told how to say a name, I have this little thing switch in my head that says, don't say it the way you were just told. So, Mark, man, it is so good to see you. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, Otis.
Good deal. Hey, I want to jump into something because I'm always fascinated when people focus a for-profit business on helping nonprofits. There's almost a little bit of irony in there in some way. So how did that happen for you? How did that become your focus area?
I was an ordained minister for 16 years, and coming out of that was this self-discovery of how I like to work, the work I like to do, and through that realizing, okay, maybe I can leverage that wiring, that kind of way that I'm built in such a way to help other churches and to help many churches at once rather than just being in one place, because that was part of the frustration and kind of the tension point for me was just kind of being in this one place and all of that. So that discovery kind of opened up into like, oh, I think I could help a lot of people at once and help a lot of organizations take steps forward. So, and then, just the idea of for-profit, nonprofit, I mean, really, it's a tax classification more so than anything. If you are not watching, if a nonprofit says we don't need to worry about money, they're not going to be around very long anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah. Did impact drive you from the pulpit to the coaching aspect I think that's probably the way I'd like to frame it. Is that what happened?
I think impact related to kind of understanding my own effectiveness. In other words, I really was, I was frustrated about the work that I was doing, but I still loved kind of this idea of who or what I was working for. So it really wasn't about that church and my work for them as much as the X's and O's that was expected of me every day and what my job description kind of put on me and how that restricted me. But then there also became this other side of it, understanding that if I can get to the place where my work is ideal for me, someone else is looking at this position that I'm in and saying that is my ideal work. So if I can find my spot, someone else is going to find theirs. And while I could kind of stay in that place, it wasn't until I realized that the frustration was internal as opposed to external. I think it's real easy to blame your boss. It's real easy to blame your work culture and say, yeah, my boss sucks, or he can't lead, or she's just always micromanaging me, or whatever that looks like. I would say more times than not, I think it's about the internal work that you're kind of encountering as opposed to allowing them to dictate everything for you.
How did you experience that change as you made that transition? What was it? What you hoped it would be, or did you kind of fall into those same patterns again, and that's what led to that reflection?
Wow, this is it's almost like you read the book that I just wrote. I went on a process of discovery in this, like everybody else was telling me the job that I should go to. Everybody else said, "This is you should be this. You should go do this." And I really looked at that as like, it was not aspirational to me. I didn't like, oh, wow, yes, absolutely. It just did not click for me. If anything, it became borderline repulsive to me. I just like, that does not light a fire under me. That does not excite me in any way. And I really began to reflect on like, I've been kind of lazy about this. I have just kind of floated into where other people expected me to be. And I wonder if that's like connected to my frustration. Well, of course it is, right? And in that, one of the crazy things that happened was I was essentially told when my last day was going to be, because I had this frustration. It was leaking out into the people that I was working with. And I think it was just kind of enough for them. And it was like, yeah, why don't you just go find whatever you're supposed to do? And I was hurt by it, but like the next day,
for lack of a better way, my experience with the Methodist Church, the pastor council, I think is what we call it. So now I'm feeling like not very good Methodist, because I can't remember what we call it. But the pastor council, your boss in the church, they recognized it in you also. Is that an accurate statement?
I think, I don't remember everything with great clarity in terms of like what exactly was said, but I think, and I don't blame him at all, right? For him, as he's looking at the organization and the whole team, he's saying, man, Mark, this is not going well anymore. And you need to go figure out what you're going to do. But we're done here. And yeah, so then it was like this, well, I better figure it out. And really through a very quick process of discovery, just began to identify how I like to work, but the stuff that brought meaningful work and value back to me when I was in work. And when I did that, and I kind of identified those 5 things of meaningful work, man, it wasn't that pastor church seat that I had been in for many years. And my wife and I looked at each other and like, you need a different job. So.
Could you talk a little bit about disentangling other people's thoughts and ideas for your life from what you really want? Because I think it's this really tricky situation. It's easy to say, focus on what you want. But every idea I've heard as far as a career, I've heard from someone else at some point. So there's this muddy area in the middle there that's kind of hard to disentangle. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, man. So... yeah, for me, right, I can only speak for me and kind of some of the people that I've helped kind of go through their own process. I think there's a place where outside wisdom, outside advice is helpful. It is guidance, and it is cursory to where you're going, because they understand you, because they understand kind of the work that's going on inside of you, and are asking you good questions along the way. And I think that might be the key place there is somebody asking you any questions, or are they just kind of, vomiting on you and telling you this is what you should do? So that would be kind of the first check for me is like, are they asking me questions? Are they kind of like trying to diagnose and like really help me here? Or is it just kind of like, you've been doing this, you qualify for this, go do this. I think that would be the first check in that. And the second thing is like, when they give you that, I mean, you're the ultimate responsibility for those decisions and steps after that. When they tell you that, is it something that kind of like gets you excited? I had a conversation with someone last week who was recruiting me for something that they were doing, and it was just kind of I think I could do that. There was not a fire in me. But I think then the real rubber meets the road is like, do I need a paycheck today? And that's like one of the worst places to be, right? When you got to have a paycheck, and you may have to just do a job for a while, and within that time of doing the job, then you can really nail down what it is you want to do. But I think, Camden, I think it's making sure that you have people that are asking you good questions, but then also like getting out of your own junk enough to really interpret the world around you. I think those are the 2 keys.
Yeah, you're talking into my favorite space is transition, because that's one of my passions, my give back to my veteran tribe, is helping guys figure out what you're describing. and it's interesting to hear I think it just proves that no matter what you're transitioning out of, the problems you run into are the same. Like my NFL friends, I've talked with them about it. You know, they've played football their entire life. It's their entire identity. And now career's over. Now what? Same thing with military. Same thing. You were a preacher, a minister for 16 years. That was your whole identity. And now something else. You realize, it's not working for me anymore. How do you, this is a great question, because the spot that you're in now, the space that you're in now in life and career and business, how do you continue to measure that satisfaction of where you are now, and not, we've all got our doubts, right? But not that not diving into the doubt, but actually say, yes, this is it because of this data, this whatever. How are you doing that?
Well, coming out of that process of discovery, I said there was 5 criteria for me to pursue meaningful work, and I keep filtering everything on that criteria of 5. And if it checks all 5 of those, I feel like I'm in a good space, and I should keep going. Other opportunities that don't, I need to just, even though there could be things that are attractive about it, I mean, after a quick look at, maybe it doesn't do one of those 5. Does everything else compensate enough if I can pull that one out? In other words, how valuable is that criteria? People say they want to work from home. Okay, that's cool. But what if the salary was X percentage higher than you anticipated? Would that be enough for you to not work from home? And it may or may not be. It may, maybe something about that criteria. So you really want to make sure that the filters are really valuable. And the second thing I would say is, I was just on a retreat for the last couple of days that has really helped clear my head on a few things. And I recognized that I had some junk I wasn't taking out every day, some junk that just kind of was piling up in the corner. And that caused my head to really not perform at high level. And you've got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because you can easily get into comparison. You can easily get into, my job sucks. What am I going to do? You can easily fall into those places that are going to pull you away from kind of true north. What's best for you?
What are some, and you identified some there. What do you think are some issues that people run into when trying to identify their own criteria and start to build their filters for their life?
I would say one of the most important things you need to do is you need to be able to end a chapter in your life. If you're at a place where someone else has chosen for you, like they've said, hey, this is your last day, sometimes that grief, that emotional kind of bucket never gets dealt with. And if you don't deal with it, it's going to hold you back from doing other things. And you need to be able to end a chapter in your life. And sometimes that can go faster than other times, but you need to be able to just say, okay, it's done. Like when my boss came to me and said, this is your last day, 2 or 3 weeks out, whatever that was, this is going to be your last day. We're going to have a party for you. But your time here is done. And there's like this shock, right? But then it actually, in hindsight, was one of the greatest things that ever happened in my life because of what it forced me to do. And if I wouldn't have been able to end that chapter of my life, deal with it, and be able to move on, I probably would have just kept going back and get the same job. It's just at a different location. And sometimes that is actually what you need to do, is you need to just end it and now make a right turn, and let's find the next thing.
Yeah, that catalyst, and it's interesting for you, the catalyst came from outside. And I find the irony in it also, in the fact that the catalyst to change came from outside, but when you decided to change, all these other outside voices were telling you to do all these other things that didn't fit.
Yeah.
How did you how did you weigh into the course that you're on now? Because and we had Pastor Bob on. Boy, it's been like 3 years, right, Camden? Pastor Bob, my minister here in town, who, by the way, is retiring. I don't know if you knew that, Camden, but had this same question about Pastor Bob, or to Pastor Bob. When you're running a church, you're kind of an entrepreneur, you're kind of in charge, but you're not in charge, and it's a weird dichotomy. You're serving God, you're serving the people in the pews, all those sort of things. It's very, very different business. But now you shift into a true business. What was that hurdle that you had to come to terms with? Of, all right, it's no longer and pardon all my church metaphors, but I'm having fun with them today. It's no longer the plate that's being passed during the offertory. It's all these other things. It's somebody paying you for your actions, which is much different. How did that shift come into your head to see that I need to be a business now?
So there, one of the tension points that I had that kind of propelled me into that place of dissatisfaction was I don't. If people are listening from that time in my life, I don't mean this to be a reflection on you as much as it is on what I was discovering about myself. There was no reward for hard work.
Yeah.
You could bust your butt, you could really deliver on something, but there really was no incentive to really do that. There was nothing kind of like there was no reward for that hard work. And I really recognized that was something that I was craving. And deeply connected to that was this idea that there was a ceiling on me. And in other words, like there wasn't anywhere for me to go. There was no promotion that was available to me. There wasn't an opportunity to grow kind of in my own ability to be as a leader and to function as a leader and to really to get paid as a leader. That really wasn't available there. But then I also reflected on, instead of just the negative, I was reflecting on the positive. What were the things that I really enjoyed? Like, where was their success? What were the functions or the tasks of which that I really enjoyed? And when I examined that, I began to get a better picture of the type of work that I would like to do. And for me, I really understood that I thrived in projects. I liked things that have a beginning and have an end. I was leading a soccer league that I had started. And I just found that I loved leading up to the season. I loved recruiting coaches. I loved kind of this startup and the energy and going through the season. But I kind of really liked the end of the year celebration and wrapping things up and having a break for a while. And I really liked those kinds of, I liked those types of opportunities in my life. And so when I began to look at what I had done well with, what I enjoyed, there became this idea of consulting and, the length of engagements. I'm like, a lot of this really fits. And so I just kept pushing my nose farther and farther into that until I could get into that space.
So, talking about, reflecting on that chapter and, understanding the negatives so you can change that moving forward, but then also looking at the positives so you can try to keep those around. What would be your advice, or, you could use a personal example for it, around when you're making that transition, or maybe you've already made the transition and there's a positive thing that you loved that you can't find in this new part of your life. Like, I'll give a really easy example of, like, with me, with my rugby career of playing, I had a back injury, couldn't play anymore. Now I coach. The higher level coaching I get, the more I feel like I'm scratching that itch. There was a game this year when we played Cal that we lost a close game, and it was this really, really, really tough game. And I remember afterwards having this really weird feeling where I was like, I wish I got hit today. Like, I wish, like, I didn't bleed with these guys that I was out there coaching. Like, and it's, now, I don't know that I want to go out and get punched in the face all the time, but there was this thing that I realized that I was kind of missing that I can't really get in a professional career, was I'm paying somebody to punch me in the face once a week. So, that's a funny example of it, but there's all sorts of different examples where it's a positive thing that you have to leave behind. Well, what's your advice on that?
Well, there's definitely, there are definitely moments and seasons of that ministry time, that church time that I do miss. But as have been in this space now for 10 years, I would say one of the things I really enjoy, I enjoy the reward of that new contract. I enjoy kind of this idea of like, yes, here we go. Here's another one. And just like the feeling of like a win in many ways, it is a win, but I love it within that win. It also means I get to work with a whole new team, some people that I connect with at a very high level. And I almost always come out of that with new friendships, new relationships from that client work, because the work that I do typically lasts 9 to 18 months intensively with another church or nonprofit. So I look at it. I mean, there's the win of getting the contract, but there's also like this whole new world of relationship and friendship, and really a laboratory that I get to learn from as I coach them through their next season. I love that.
So would you say that it's essentially, it goes back to what you said of ending that chapter and like accepting that it's like, look, that positive thing, that thing that I enjoyed, I'm not going to get to do anymore. And then instead shifting the focus rather from the past towards what you can do now in those new processes.
Let me go into that church space here for just a second. So if you're perhaps not someone of faith, bear with me here. I think you'll understand. Within our practice of church, one of the big places of growth or personal steps that people would take is this idea of baptism and what baptism represents spiritually for someone. And when that kind of time happened within the church calendar and people that we had invested relationship with, when they took that step, it was really a meaningful place. It's almost like being with someone during a wedding or something else, kind of a big life moment. And so it's those life moments and walking with people side by side when they go through those life moments that I really miss. And because there's a lot of value that comes from kind of being in that place with them and kind of putting a flag at that spot in their life and being there with them. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I do miss it at the times where it's like, as I see it happen around me with the church that I attend, but it's not a place of envy. So I love the value that it represents. I love what it's doing for those people. And I'm like, oh yeah, those are great moments. But I don't really have that envy there. So I think that probably helps me kind of affirm the steps that I took and the path that I chose in this idea of, I don't sit here thinking that I need that. I got to have that in my life again. So I made a mistake. So I think that really helps.
What's when you get that new client? You can describe this through a methodology, but really what I would love for you to share with us is what's that common thread problem, kind of like, oh yeah, there's another one. Oh yeah, there's another one with the church, and I'm making an assumption here that there's a fairly significant difference between a church and a regular old nonprofit, if you will. So what's a common thread that you say, 99% of the time you go into that new client and you're like, all right, where's it at? Yep. Oh, there it is right there.
I think there is there is a commonality behind the idea of, well, let me back up a little bit. Pastors, senior pastors, the one who is where a lot of this is on their shoulders. and if they're listening, they don't have to confess this to other people, but we'll just talk about it here and no one else will know. Pastors are equal parts ego and equal parts insecurity. They understand how to have the charisma and how to present and communicate and lead people through, a sermon or a teaching and bring value in that way. And kind of in just general parlance, bravado and can raise up the emotion of a crowd and lead them to places. But there is also, for pastors, there's a lot of doubt that they have to deal with because they actually get a lot of criticism from people. I mean, I don't know why people think that they just need to tell pastors all the things that they think they're doing wrong or whatever. But anyways, they get a lot of that negative feedback that comes to them. They probably don't get a lot of positive feedback. And so there's within the adventure of like this new thing that they want to do, they're going to present themselves well, and they have that confidence that, yes, we're going to do this. And then in the private moments, just kind of this understanding of like, hey, Mark, man, what do I do here? What do I do with this? And just kind of understanding the places where I can build that trust, and then privately build into that place where there are doubts, so that their confidence takes them to that place of discovering the new adventure. That's usually one of the most common things.
That kind of brings me back to something I was thinking earlier about your transition into for-profit, from the church, of the guilt around profit. Do you think that is part of what leads to insecurity for a lot of pastors? Because it's, you're trying to do this good thing and you might understand it all the way, but it can feel weird when you're getting paid for something like that. Or, you could that guilt could kind of build up like that. Is that a little bit what you're talking about?
I don't know if guilt is the word that I would put to it, but there is certainly there is a conflict, and the conflict is this. As a pastor, you have likely, if you've gone to university or seminary for training, you have been taught and the value that's been brought to you in those classrooms are on theology and practicum and how to lead spiritually and the history of church and philosophy. And these are the things that have been added to you. Then all of a sudden you are responsible for this financial machine that's happening. And within that financial machine, if it doesn't support all of the ministry that is happening around you, some things have to be removed. And people are very emotionally connected to that. And add to that conflict, my salary comes out of that financial machine. That financial machine is fed by the people who keep giving me negative feedback. And it really becomes this complex financial atmosphere that is not as simple as, hey, if we sell 1,000 tractors this month, we've hit our quota and we're good. And it is a very complex financial machine. Also, I would say what brings another level of emotional turmoil to it is that pastors just simply don't get paid very much. And what's happening in the church space is that COVID complicated the work that churches had to do very quickly, and everybody else was either quitting their job or working from home, getting raises. All of these things began to happen. And as COVID made things worse for churches, staff at churches were realizing, I can make 50% more and I don't have to work weekends if I go work over here. Tell me why I shouldn't do this?
Ooh.
And it just really is, I don't know, Camden, I don't know if guilt's the right word, but there's a lot of emotional complexity behind that financial machine that runs churches. Absolutely.
And, it makes me think of that like duality that you talked about there of you have this financial stress for yourself and for your family, that is, I need to make more money in order to be responsible. And then at the other end of that spectrum, you have something eating away at you that every dollar you're making could be going towards X, Y, or Z. And it's a very common thing. I think it's a very, it's a more vivid example inside of the church, but I think it's a common thing you see, in the for-profit and other nonprofits as well. How do you, or I guess, how have you applied those lessons towards the other areas? Because like we said, it's not as vivid as an example. It doesn't feel like you're taking $1 out of the offering plate, but you are taking $1 out of somebody's paycheck in your organization or whatever it is. How have you applied that to some of your, clients? Sorry. Blanked on the word clients there for a second. Sorry about that, y'all.
Yeah, so we're really getting into a place of what do you believe about giving to the church? And I would say that my contemporaries, those that are, young boomers, Gen Xers, we grew up watching some folks on a very public platform, perhaps because they were large and because they were able to have an audience and get notoriety, their failures were magnified and discussed widely. And so my contemporaries say, "Why, I'm not going to be that guy." And whatever the criteria is for that guy, it's they abuse money, or they advocate for themselves to get paid on everything that they do, and whatever that negative stigma is around pastors and money, they said, well, I'm not going to be that guy, so I'm going to do everything as the opposite of that. And that's just as unhealthy as being on one end of that spectrum. And so I think the lessons we apply is in this space of churches, just understanding, what guides us is the Bible, and that actually says a lot about money and how we are to interact with money and how our hearts view money. And that's the place we want to operate. That's the place we want to function when it comes to that conversation. So I think that really is part of the lesson, is bringing in this for churches, bringing in that sense of what is the truth that we're built on. Oh, okay, it's this. And so how do we find that as the directional operations for this conversation?
Do you find that's, and I think that's a really interesting differentiator between coaching a church and coaching anything else, is, you've got a manual, right? Mine are right over there. You've got a manual to say, have you found that to be simpler? And I'd like the comparison between, in that same sense of coaching a church and coaching a nonprofit, because like you said, I think that's so interesting. It's one of those, the church has a manual. Have you found that to be simpler to point that out, or is it more of starts to become almost, well, that's not the way I read, Matthew 6. That's, the way you're reading it, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I don't know that it's necessarily simple in that way, except for this, Otis. I would say that for any nonprofit or church that I've worked with, there is a conversation around, or even the periphery of, core values, and understanding kind of what really dictates their true north, and what are they going after in this process. And I can tell you when that's not distinct, when that's not figured out. Usually they don't have a very clear picture about their future anyways. So by the time they get to me in their process, they probably have gone through some sort of discovery of core values. What is our true north? What is the thing that guides us? And because of that, then in getting in the work with me, I can usually pick up pretty fast where they stand on those kind of big ideas about money and giving, because that is my primary space of consulting, is capital campaigns.
I kind of want to shift a little bit back to, where we started, talking about the transitioning, transition coaching, that area. Something interesting that you talked about in your own story, and I think everyone tends to do this, is it's this: when you tell a story backwards, it all makes sense. When you look back and you can connect all the dots, oh, well, of course, that's how the way it went. I want you to play a devil's advocate a little bit with that, of why, because it's almost one of those things where it's like you can always tell the story backwards. So how do you know you're getting the story right? It's kind of what I'm getting at. What are your thoughts on that?
Along the way, over the last 10 years, there has been, I would say, probably 3 points in our lives, and I'm saying first person plural here because my wife is definitely along for the ride for this because of this work. There has definitely been at least 3 points where I wasn't sure that I had 60 days worth of income or less. And so it's easy for doubt to creep in. And in fact, it has. When you're a freelancer, you gotta take that trash out every day, or it just piles up, and then you don't operate from a good space. And so, if you take your time machine and meet me at one of those 3 points, I'm probably going to tell you this was the worst decision I have ever made. What am I doing? So yeah, I mean, find me in 6 months. That might be the same thing I might say the same thing then. But when the trash is taken out, I can look at, those 5 criteria for meaningful work, and I'm still hitting all 5 of them. Now, I still got to hustle. I got to find the work. I'm a freelancer, so if I don't have the work, then I don't get paid. But yeah, you're right. There's moments of which the story, if just a focus on that moment, then the story may not necessarily be the happy ending.
And it's one thing that sounds like you're also kind of hinting at there, and sorry if I got this wrong, but it's also, telling yourself that story as like a mechanism, that it's like, this is the way I'm going to understand that so I can make my path forward. And if you got the story wrong, you could still change the story, and it still served you during that time. And going back to, your 5 filters there, I think, as long as you're on that, obviously you're on track there. But, if you look back and you say, look, that car accident I got in, that changed my life, and now I'm doing X, Y, Z. And then years later, you're like, hold up, this does not check with those filters. This isn't on that. Then you can just change that story again. And it's a useful mechanism in that way. What are your thoughts on that? Did I get that right?
I was coaching, I think I was coaching 5th grade boys basketball. And before our first practice, the league director calls me. He says, hey, we assigned you assistant coach. And I was like, I don't know about that. Because I don't know. That if you've ever coached a team and you have not picked your own assistant coaches, you know what that can be. And I was like, I'm good. I'm good. And he's like, no. We need to do this. And all right, fine. So I show up and I meet this guy, and he's got this big smile on his face. He's like the happiest guy in the world. I'm like, what's this guy's problem? What is going on here? And so we get into practice, and we got the boys moving, and they're doing good things. And after practice is done, he comes up to me and we start talking because he's Mr. Happy and all these kinds of things. It turned out to be that assistant coach, Nate, is a guy who introduced me to a guy who introduced me to a guy who introduced me to a guy who gave me a job, who brought a client to me, right? And there's like several things where I can trace the web back to Nate. And I think at least what I'm getting out of your prompt there is, I think there are times at which you need to have your eyes open to what's going on around you, because it can lead to your next conversation. And sometimes those conversations are work related. Sometimes those conversations are life related, but there's a lot of people that can add value and wisdom to your life. And I'm kind of grateful for that assignment of Nate into my, this is my space, man. I got this. But Nate added some amazing value to my life. And, however long ago, 15 years later, I consider him a good friend. And it's just interesting how your story can change over time because of those people that enter into your life. And the other thing I would say is if you're into a transition, or a transition is soon to be coming, I think one of the best things you can do is expand your network, if not just overhaul your network. Because one of the things that I found was the people who knew me as X didn't know how to think of me as Y. And it became a lot of work for them to make that leap into, you're doing what now? Huh. I never thought you could do that. And it's like, oh, well, I don't really want to have this conversation anymore. And that's really hard work to do, because you think, oh, I've got my friends, and, this guy owns a business and he's going to hire me or whatever. Well, that may not be that might just be a job. But anyways, I really think one of the most valuable things you can do is if you're anticipating a transition is expand, if not overhaul, your network, because it will invigorate you. It'll open you up to new possibilities, because if that possibility was already in your network, it probably would have come to you. And the reason you may not be understanding the other possibilities that are out there is because you're in a network that is somewhat closed, and it waits for you out there. So you need to find someone who can springboard you into a whole nother circle of people.
Yeah.
Dad, I can tell you have a question. I just wanted to put a bow on that a little bit with a little sports analogy of, it's like when you watch any tournament, NBA Finals and Stanley Cup just finished a couple days ago, or 2 weeks ago by the time this comes out. And when you look at the team that wins, it's easy to paint the story. But then you start talking about the leaders and the people in those other teams. It's their job to paint the story as well. And that story wasn't true this time, but its story still serves as a good mechanism for them to move forward on that. Just like you're saying, you don't know if those people are going to, if you get that new introduction to somebody, you paint that story, like, oh my gosh, this is going to do X, Y, Z, and then we're going to go do this and this. And then that might not come true, but that's still a useful mechanism for you to move forward with, because without it, you're not even going to try.
Oh, yeah. Well, and what you were just talking about, Mark, just reminds me of my favorite Marshall Goldsmith quote. Now, as a matter of fact, I think one of his books is titled this: "What got you here won't get you there."
Yeah.
And it's the adage of, you're the sum of the 5 people that are closest to you. So if those 5 people don't sum up to who you want to be, then you ought to start changing who those 5 people are, which is an interesting thing. It seems strange to look at, and people always kind of give me the cockeyed head of, you mean, I should get a divorce or this, disown my family. And it's like, no, dude, that's not what it means.
Yeah.
But it does mean these other things about, if you're going into that space in that industry, then you probably ought to know people in that space, in that industry.
Yeah, Otis, I think you mentioned that some of the folks in your audience are perhaps professional sports players or military veterans. I think pastors have a similar identity crisis that those guys do. Those could be gals, men and women. Is that it is an all-encompassing career. If you're an NFL player or a professional sports player, it's an all-encompassing career. That's what you are known by. If you are in the military, that's what you're known by. It's a very specific path, and that identity kind of overtakes you. And if you try to take a turn outside of that, there can be a lot of self-doubt. There can be a lot of things holding you back. Well, People just look at me like I'm an athlete, and they don't understand that, like, I actually went to school for, for business analysts or, something. And like now I have other things I want to pursue. And I think that's part of the challenge is like, even now I'm more than one thing. I've got a couple of things going on that aren't necessarily known by everyone, but they're things that I like to do. And it really can be an identity crisis if you don't understand yourself enough to say, no, I'm good with that because it's part of what I want to pursue in life.
No.
Do you think that there still needs to be a word attributed to it? And because I think of myself, with Tribe of Purpose, we talk about life categories, my different life categories, and those type of things. I tend to just call myself coach because I coach in different life categories also. So that one works for me. But I also think of like, and I'm blanking on the term, maybe one of y'all could help save me on this one. But it's like when you see, it's like the multi-credited people, like actors and stuff, you see this all the time, like musician, writer, producer, this. And then they have some name that they give them, which is like, it's like the multi-credit or whatever. There's a term like that. And do we need a term like that for the rest of us who aren't writer, producer, this, just something that kind of throws it all into one bucket so that we can have that identity? Or do you think that's a goal that we shouldn't be after?
I think those tags, those names are helpful for people outside of your immediate kind of target. I think it's helpful for them. My kids still don't know how to talk about what I do. And that's okay because like their cronies are not the ones I'm trying to get as a client. So it's fine. So I try to help them understand what I do. But I think when you're around the right people, that title doesn't matter. They want to know, can you add value to what I'm doing? Can you help me? And if you can help them, one of the biggest eye openers for me was, I don't even know how it happened, but I got on an advisory board for a startup. I've really tried to trace the steps back. Like, how did I get here?
Nate, it must be Nate.
I don't know. It might be. That's good insight, Otis. It's probably attributed to Nate. I don't know how I got there, but it introduced me to some amazing people. And they never asked me about being a pastor. They never asked me about like Matthew chapter 6 or whatever it is that you mentioned earlier. That never came up. We started having conversation about where this was going. And because we were all adding value, we just immediately had this bond and this connection about how we were moving forward together. And we were all bringing that help to each other in the process. And it has been an amazing place for me to kind of be in with a couple of startups. And like, I never take your hot tub time machine back 20 years. I would have never thought I'd be in that kind of a conversation. Like, how did I get here? And I think it's just making sure that like, if there's something you want to know about, kind of put your nose in there, ask some questions, meet some people, ask good questions, and see what happens.
How did you go from recruiting people to be there Sunday morning to finding businesses that clients, there's the word, see Camden, it must be hereditary. I couldn't think of that word either. To finding clients for your business?
I think there was a realization that at some point, the people that I was trying to connect with to join the soccer league, and the people that I was trying to connect with of come to Sunday morning, it was the same thing. It was like, hey, would you be interested in this? Because this is what we do. And I think it's the same idea. It's, hey, are you thinking about this? Because we can bring solutions to that. And once I kind of got through that hurdle, it became pretty natural to find some people who needed the help. And, I had to learn how to be a salesman or whatever that looks like. But you gotta lead them to a place of helping them know that you can help them.
No, that's awesome, and I love the fact that there were similarities in it, and I had what I learned, but I changed it just a minute ago when I said it had to be Nate, because I think if we look for it, we all have a Nate in our life, whether it happened 15 years ago, like you said with Nate, or it may happen this afternoon. Yeah. We've all got a Nate in our life, and I think that's, if we're open to it, Nate's there. And by the way, thank you, Nate. I'd love to meet you sometime too, because you must be a really awesome guy. But that's what I learned, is we all have a Nate in our life. So Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
I just want to add on to that, if you don't believe what we're saying about, everyone having a Nate, that everyone does this with like negative things super easily. Like the two easy examples are like, in politics for the US, it's like the Koch brothers and George Soros. It's like everything goes back to them. You can just as easily tie those strings for something positive in your own life and start to look at that and try to look at those positives. It's a muscle we're pretty good with. We just don't use it on the positive as often. But no, for me, I think I learned a lot today, but the only thing I could say succinctly would be, Mark, what you said about take out the trash. And it's like almost not getting so down on yourself in those moments when you do have those valleys of, not starting to think, oh my gosh, is everything wrong? Did I do this right? Like take out the trash, then you can think about that. Then you can have that conversation with yourself. And I think that's a really important lesson to stop people from getting into that negative spiral that can happen so much when you're in those valleys.
Awesome. Mark, how about you? What'd you learn?
I think for me today, this idea of transitions that we've talked about has really, it's just really profound. And I think what I've learned is that even having the conversations with you today cements the fact for me that a lot of people go through a transition and they internalize everything. And people don't want to talk about that transition they're going through because there is either some idea that it represents failure in my life, it represents something about me that's wrong, like, I was let go or I was fired, or, they don't have a space for me there. They don't want me on that job anymore. Something's wrong with me. And I just would say, I don't think that that's always the case. And for me, that learning just continues to show itself as I have more and more conversations about this idea of transitions.
Awesome. Love that thought. So, Mark, how can folks get in touch with you, find out what you got going on?
Yeah, I think this is real timely to what's going on in my own space. I just wrote a book that got published called My Job Sucks, Now What? Because I found that this story of transition that I went through and this discovery really resonated with a lot of people, and it became something helpful. And so I just started sitting down and writing it all out. What happened? What's the story behind it? How did I come to this idea of meaningful work and what those 5 criteria are? And so I just put it in a book that just got published. And I would say, hey, you don't need to hire me for anything. If that book brings value to you, after you're done reading it, give it to somebody else. And that you'll help them. Be a Nate for somebody else. So you can go on Amazon, you can get that book, My Job Sucks, Now What? Because sometimes we get in that place and we're like, how do I get out of here? I don't even know what to do. And it's that idea of you got to take the trash out first, and then we can get after it.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, Mark, we really appreciate you spending time with us today and hanging out and sharing your thoughts and lessons and insights.
Thank you, Otis, Camden. Man, I have really enjoyed this conversation. Obviously, we went longer than most of these ever do. And man, if we can have another conversation in the coming months, I'd love to be a part of that as well.
That sounds great. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show. And a special thanks to our guest, Mark Slabaugh, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam and Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time.